So glad to have you here for this conversation this afternoon. My name is Eric Liu. I'm the Executive Director of the Aspen Institute's program on citizenship and American identity. And I'm a deep partner in that role with the Aspen Institute's arts program. This session is really kind of the spawn of our two programs in a way, really thinking about questions not only of citizenship and immigration, and not only of art and culture, but really the ways in which these topics interweave. And we're at a time right now in the United States and really around the world where this deep operating question of who is us is at the forefront. And these questions of identity and belonging and place and nationhood play out in ways that are creative and beautiful and healthy, and they play out in ways that are awful and divisive and bloody. And all of these things are happening at once right now in the United States. And our view, certainly at the arts program, but as well in the Citizenship and American Identity program, our view is that one of the best ways to explore these kinds of heavy topics is not with a litany of policy ideas or with a whole lot of 10-point plans, but really to actually understand the texture of the culture that we are situated in, and understand the stories that we are telling and hearing, understand the norms and the values that are embedded in those stories, and really begin to activate the ways in which story itself becomes a conduit for empathy, for compassion, for shared identity and common purpose. And so really the spirit of exploring the ways in which immigration, identity, art, and culture interweave in the American context today is the aim of this deep dive. What we're going to do, just to give you a little bit of a roadmap here, I will introduce our wonderful panelists and presenters here in a moment. Each of them is going to get a turn for about 5 minutes, presenting a bit of their work. And that will vary in different ways, the forms of presentation that you'll see. But it'll give you a taste right at the outset of the breadth and diversity of the people we have gathered here on stage. And then after that, we're going to open up a conversation on stage that will be fairly free-flowing and responding to a lot of the prompts and ideas that folks will just have shared. And then we will leave a good amount of time in the final probably 30 minutes or so for a room-wide conversation. And that will take partly the form of Q&A if you are moved to ask questions, but also partly the form of town meeting if you are called in Quaker spirit to rise and share your what's on your heart or your mind. So we really want to be inclusive in that kind of conversation. So welcome, everybody. Let me just quickly introduce folks here. It's a delight to be with this group here. Jose Antonio Vargas, a dear friend and collaborator, the executive director and co-founder of Define American, a documentarian, a journalist, creator of a new online platform for storytelling about the new America, demographically speaking, called Emerging Us, emerging.us, and probably one of the country's most prominent and visible undocumented journalists and activists who's been forcing conversations, welcome and unwelcome, about what it means to define American. To his left, really pleased and honored to be joined today by Lina, Sergie, Attar, who is the executive director of the Kamal Foundation, the Karam Foundation. And the foundation, as we're going to hear a little bit about, grew out of the crisis in Syria. Not only the wars and the destruction, but of course the refugee crisis that has spilled forth from Syria across those borders and around the world, including here to the United States. The Karam Foundation is very focused on work that we will hear about, giving voice to and activating the lives and stories and memories of people displaced by this conflict. Lina as well is trained as an architect, which will be relevant in a moment. Next, we have Maz Jobrani, who This is not faint praise, but I mean it truly. My favorite Iranian-American comedian, yes. And truly one of the great comedians of our generation on these questions of race, religion, identity here in the United States and beyond. We met a couple of years ago at a Kennedy Center event where he brought his great brand of humor and storytelling to new audiences. Next, Roberta Uno is the creator and executive director of Arts for a Changing America, which is a 5-year, this sounds like the Star Trek mission statement, a 5-year journey, a 5-year voyage supported by the Ford Foundation and others to explore the ways in which art can activate this sense of a changing America, demographically, in terms of our identity and our sense of shared narrative. And the work that they're doing in this venture, convening artists, citizens, activists, immigrants from all around the United States has really been thrilling. And then last but not least, my friend Melvin Mar, who's the executive producer of, and this is not faint praise, my favorite Chinese-American family sitcom on TV right now called Fresh Off the Boat, which is a hit sitcom on ABC, based initially on the memoir and life of the celebrity restaurateur and author Eddie Huang, and a sitcom that has not only given voice to Asian America in a generation where this group is actually the fastest growing cohort of Americans, but has really been part of a larger wave, not only at ABC in particular, but in culture generally, of a rapid catch-up diversification of our mass popular culture. So, just the introductions alone are so nourishing. We can all go home right now, but we're going to hear a little bit now from each of these folks, and I'm going to ask Jose actually to lead us off with his first quick presentation.
I have 5 minutes, so I'm going to make sure that I stay in that limit. My name is Jose Antonio Vargas, as Eric said. I'm really privileged to be here. I get called a lot of names. I go on Fox News pretty regularly now. So I get called a lot of names, a lot of them bad. But first and foremost, I am a journalist and I'm a filmmaker, and I tell stories. That's what I do. As any immigrant will tell you, like, everything I ever learned about this country, I learned from the Mountain View Public Library, who let me borrow all the books and all the movies that I possibly can, right? I talk like this and I sound like this because of Martin Scorsese films and Frederick Wiseman documentaries and Stephen Sondheim CDs. That's why I sound like this. And just a little FYI, when you see an Asian person who has a Spanish name, it means they're Filipino. Might be a little confused. So there's a lot of talk now about privilege, right? Like, we all have our own privileges. I mean, we're at the Aspen Institute, so it's a pretty privileged place. But the question I think about privilege is, what are you going to do to risk it? Like, what do you do to risk your privilege? So 5 years ago, can you see that? So I did that. I basically, after consulting 28 lawyers, all of whom said don't do it, I decided that I would come out publicly as an undocumented immigrant in the New York Times Magazine, preparing myself for whatever the consequences were. I've been here since I was 12, so that's almost 23 years, and I have committed a lot of fraud. I lied in a lot of government forms, which is what we must do to survive and work. And my whole goal in coming out was to let people in, right, in terms of understanding what this issue really is about and what's really at stake outside of borders, walls, Republican, Democrat. Part of the coming out process is being very, very open about certain things. Like, this is a really pretty big check that I wrote to the IRS. It's on my Twitter profile, just so people can really see it. People are, especially people in the conservative Republican movement are like, wait a second, how come the IRS know who you are? Well, the IRS doesn't care whether or not I'm here legally or illegally, they care whether or not I pay my taxes. And I have paid so much taxes, I should be a Republican. And now, and Eric knows this, because I'm undocumented, you can't actually knowingly hire me, because although we do know that, people hire undocumented people all the time. The only way for me to survive here as an openly undocumented immigrant is to start a business and be a business owner. So now, through Define American and Emerging Us, I employ 15 people. I'm a job creator. And I'm a progressive job creator, so I provide health insurance, really good benefits. But because I'm undocumented, I can't benefit from the same health insurance that I provide my own employees. Right? So that's the reality of immigration in America. I'm saying all of this because given where we are right now with Donald Trump, with immigration reform, it is even more imperative that the work of storytellers and artists are at the center of the conversation, to insist on the gray area and to blur the lines between what is legal and illegal and what is black and white, right? So at Define American, we were kind of at the forefront of trying to figure out how do we get undocumented people into the mainstream? And in this country, when we say mainstream, we usually mean white America, right? So that means getting on the cover of Time magazine. This was the first time 32 undocumented people were on the cover of a major magazine, published 22 million copies around the world. And for me as a gay man, I just remembered that Ellen DeGeneres cover when I was in high school that ironically I hid in the closet because I didn't want my grandparents to see it. But that was my model for I remember when we had a photo shoot of 32 undocumented young people in New York, I'm like, hey, we're honoring Ellen DeGeneres and what she did, right? You come out to let people in. So that's what we do. I also made a documentary that CNN aired, and it's on Netflix now, called Documented. So basically, this film, I chronicled what it's like to be separated from your family. So I haven't seen my mom for 23 years this August. My sister was 1 year old when I left, so she's almost 24, and I have a brother who I've never met. He only knows me through the iPhones that I sent him and the money that I provide every month. But to show what that looks like. And for us, the biggest success of this film has been showing it in Republican conservative places. We've been very intentional in reaching out to college Republicans. So for example, we showed a big screening of this film at Miami University in Ohio with the college Republicans. And after the screening, 300 young people. They were all so confused. They were like, why can't you see your mom? And I'm like, why don't you ask, your congressional members about that, right? And then after traveling all across the country, I've realized that until we can talk to white people and black people about immigration, until we actually make you realize that you're not white, white is not a country, right? You came from somewhere. Did you come here from Ireland, from Italy, from Sweden, from Germany? What is your own immigration background? Did you come here pre-Ellis Island? Because then you just showed up. And when people say that they had their papers through Ellis Island, the papers were actually just IDs. It wasn't like a visa or anything, right? So we made a film with MTV called White People, which Rush Limbaugh loved. Just kidding. But the purpose of the film was to engage young white people around immigration and around this idea of, as far as I'm concerned, every American must be able to answer 3 fundamental questions. Where did you come from? How did you get here? Who paid? Right? Until you can answer those 3 questions, you can't talk to me about the border that you don't understand and some law that you don't even know what it is about. And I think Native Americans and Black Americans, right, many of whom coming from slavery, has a very different experience when we talk about that. And it's really, really important, by the way, because you hear a lot about people saying, hey, we're a country of immigrants. Yes, we are. But we must not leave out the African American experience and the Native American experience in that conversation, right? And then now, what we're doing is convincing more undocumented people to come out, right? And it has risks. Coming out has risks. I'm privileged to be doing this work. So we provide people who are ready to come out a way to do that. So this is that campaign. Oops. There's audio in there. Can you hear it? Nope. It's okay. We can save it for later.
Yeah, let's save that for later, Jose.
It's fine.
Let's save it for later.
Save it for later.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jose. Jose, one of the things that is so, I can't overstate just because it's normal now for Jose to be out and about and doing events like this, but Jose, in a way, because he is celebrated and well known, is perhaps a less likely target for immediate deportation, although we'll get into later a brush you had with that a couple of years ago that actually kept you from the Ideas Festival that year. But the thing that Jose opened with, which is, what are you doing with your privilege, with the pile of capital that you have? And Jose is spending it to ensure that people who don't have the same amount of visibility and kind of shieldedness of his relative fame, to make sure that they can come out relatively safely as well. And Lina's work is so much about similarly taking a pile of capital and experience and ensuring that lots and lots of people who are not only without voice right now, but without number in the American imagination actually get understood and accounted for. So Lina, please tell us about your work.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here. Whenever I'm able to speak about Syria in any way in front of an audience that is primarily not Syrian, it's very moving to me. And I thank all of you for being here and to be listening to this specific story about what it means to be Syrian, what it means to be Syrian American, and what we're trying to do to help Syrian refugees. When I was 12 years old, my parents decided to move our family from our tiny upstate New York town, where at the time I was in 6th grade, attending a private Catholic school, back to their homeland across the world to Syria, a place that none of my friends knew existed, and actually until recently, most people didn't know that Syria existed. I left my sheltered, happy American life to find a new home among family where our roots go back centuries. I experienced everything that comes with living in a police state, the military uniforms, bowing down to authority, and most of all, I learned to be afraid of everything and everyone, afraid of my own voice, my ideas, and my thoughts. I never truly belonged. I always felt I was shifting loyalties between being Syrian and being American and failing to bridge the gap in between. Like millions who live under oppressive regimes, no, these places have a systematic method of killing dreams. And I held on to my own dream, which was to leave Syria as fast as possible back to the United States. And I did in 1998, and I was happy. Until 2011. When I saw the mass protests against the Syrian regime, I was in shock mostly because these people were no longer afraid of their voices, their thoughts, and their ideas. They were willing to die for freedom and dignity. And witnessing that level of bravery, for me, was unimaginable. And I wanted to be part of them. So I began to write under a pseudonym because even here, I was still afraid of what happened there. And I began to create and to work for this cause that I believed in, and what could go wrong. A lot went wrong. The revolution became war. War became an endless list of death. 1,000, 20,000, 100,000, 250,000, 400,000 people killed and counting. Life for every Syrian family was defined by loss, and Syria had stopped becoming a country. Instead, we were displaced people in the millions, fractured across the globe, literally dying to try to find safe haven, but often finding closed borders and xenophobic speeches about building walls and sending people back to where they belong. How does your sense of belonging change through war? You used to be from two places, but now one is being erased in physical destruction in front of your eyes, and the other is losing its meaning and its values. Both my countries are becoming unrecognizable to me. I travel with my organization, Karam Foundation, twice a year to the Syrian-Turkish border to run innovative education missions that inject a lot of art and creativity and innovation into the lives of Syrian refugee kids. It is in these missions that I still practice architecture in the form of mapping memory and instilling imagination in these kids. When I started this project 3 years ago, I would teach the kids to draw the floor plan of their home by drawing the floor plan of my home in Aleppo, which we've since lost, and telling them a story through drawing the floor plans, and we would all pretend to be little architects. And I would try to tell them, one day you'll go back and everybody will go back and rebuild Syria. And they would learn to tell stories of their homes as I drew mine. But now, 3 years later, I no longer draw homes of the past with the kids now. After them being displaced for over 4 years, many of the Syrian refugee kids don't even remember their homes in Syria anymore. Some of them don't even remember a time before they were refugees. So we draw our homes in the future now, and we draw our idealist cities in the future. And sometimes, even in the process of teaching kids how to draw an ideal city, they still can't imagine not being a refugee. Last November, during our mission in Turkey at a refugee school, I walked between the desks to see what the children were drawing, and I stopped at a young girl's map, and I asked her what the massive pointed triangles were at the edge of her city. And she looked at me in disbelief and said, "That's the refugee camp." And I looked around and I saw many future cities in the classroom had masses of tents within them. One boy had drew a C next to the tents, and I asked him, "Where is this city?" He said, "It's far, far away." And I asked him, "Well, where is it?" And he said, "You know, in Europe." One girl drew her city as a floating planet, and she said, "This city is just for Syrians. They come to it on a boat, and no one who's not Syrian is allowed inside, and this is where we're finally going to live in peace." To watch a generation of kids growing up not knowing a reality devoid of refugee camps, and to be unable to imagine a future without them, that is the definition of devastation. And I'd like to remind all of you that 5 years ago, there was no such thing as a Syrian refugee. It didn't exist. My goal is to flip a switch within every refugee child I meet to make them see only hope and possibility instead of despair. But sometimes I can't even do that for myself. This is what it's like to live in between identities, countries, and this cruel in-between present, stretched between a crumbling past and the unknown future. Over the past 5 years, I've learned that the road of revolution is filled with unbearable sorrow, but it's also filled with unwavering hope. Hope that is stronger than any other force that tries to kill it. For without hope, how could we possibly go on? One day, this war will end like all wars do. But until then, Syrians will carry their country within them, individual walking Syrias, like sacks of collective memories, as they bravely map out a better future and try to find home again. Thank you.
Thank you, Lina. You know, when Lina first told me about just this simple act of inviting children to draw the floor plans of homes, past and then future, I was just so moved. And I don't know that if there's a better metaphor for the work that we have to do in helping a rising generation, not only of refugees, but of immigrants as well. And we'll talk in a little bit about that distinction between refugees and immigrants. But enabling them to literally and figuratively be able to draw their future and envision it. You know, Maz, one of the, I suppose, time-tested formulas of comedy is tragedy plus time equals comedy, right? And the ways in which you have decided to use humor and stand-up comedy in particular to crack open wider, more open-hearted conversations about the tragedy that is race in America, the tragedy that is religious bigotry in America, is something that is really quite unique. And why don't you maybe either tell or perhaps show a bit of what that art is?
Well, yeah, first of all, you're right. Tragedy plus time is comedy. I appreciate you putting me right after Lina. That's not enough time, bro. I'm still sad. Oh my God. I was like, I'm crying over here. You're like, be funny. Okay. Why did the chicken cross the road? Because there was a wall he had to climb. No, I'm an Iranian. I was born in Iran. I grew up in America. I'm an Iranian-American immigrant. And I feel like, first of all, immigrants love America. I mean, it's every immigrant I've met in the Iranian community, in the Arab community, in the Filipino community, they love America, sometimes more than Americans, because they're coming from places where they didn't have these opportunities. If I had stayed in Iran, I could not have been a stand-up comedian. Not just because of the regime, but because my parents wouldn't have let me. But It's a whole different story. But I'm serious. Immigrants love America, and even people around the world. My stand-up has taken me around the world. I've performed all over the world in Europe, Australia, and in 7 of the Arab countries. And I've run into so many young people in these countries that go, I wish I could come to America to do something. They love America. And yet, we have a group of Americans who are afraid of immigrants. And I'm going, who are these immigrants that you're afraid of? It's almost offensive how, because part of it is I think a lot of people don't travel to these places. I really do feel, I wish we had a program that made people in their junior year in high school have to go to another country to see the rest of the world. I was guilty of it a little bit because I grew up in America and I hadn't been to the Middle East in a while. And actually I ended up, you watch enough news, you get scared. There's enough fear out there. And I went to Morocco, Northern Africa with my now wife. And we were looking, there was so much of the news of this was like 2003, 2004, red alert, orange alert, all the alert, and we'd go on CNN.com and it was red alert. And we're in the middle of Morocco in Marrakesh. And we would hear the call to prayer, Allahu Akbar. And then there goes all those terrorist movies now are in my mind, Allahu Akbar. I'm like, oh my God, where's Chuck Norris? It was scary, right? But then you go, wait a minute, these are just people living their lives. And it's so crazy. I'm telling you, if you watch enough of the right channel, you will be afraid of immigrants. I mean, I'm serious. I tried to watch 20 minutes of Fox News. This Judge Janine Pirro, you know what I'm talking about? She was freaking me out. 20 minutes in, I was like, maybe my cousin Mahmoud is up to some crap. I don't trust that guy. And I think Julio's trying to take my job. You watch enough Fox News, you'll be like, oh my God, the Mexicans are going to take our jobs and the Muslims are going to kill us and I'm going to get eaten by a shark. I might get eaten by a Mexican Muslim shark with the Zika virus named Barack. It's insanity. It's insanity because it doesn't make sense. I get so upset. I'm supposed to be funny, but I mean, it's like you get upset. Like she was in her little rant I was watching. It's not just her, a lot of the shows, but the latest rant I was watching, she said, my grandfather was an immigrant. He fought in World War I, and he came here legally. And I'm watching, I go, well, the Syrian refugees are trying to come here legally. So which one is it? Is it the Muslim ban or is it not the Muslim ban? And by the way, the Muslim ban is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. Because then all the guys got to do is come to the border and be like, no, I am Christian. And then you let them in. And that leads to Trump. Trump has a lot of ideas, but there's no plans. That's the problem. There's no plans. It's just a lot of slogans, and a lot of it is based on fear, right? It's a lot of slogans, right? We're going to make America great again. Make America great again. We're going to be number one. We're going to be number one. We're going to beat China. We're going to beat China. How are we going to do it? I have no idea. There's no ideas. It's no plans. And the dumbest thing I heard was the number one thing I've heard Trump supporters say, I love him because he says what's on his mind. He just says what's on his mind. He just says what's on his mind. And then you go, well, what are your thoughts on his policies? I don't know about his policies. He just says what's on his mind. And I will tell you, Eric, I'll tell you how dangerous all this stuff is, because I thought it was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard till I went to visit my mother. I'm not kidding. Iranian lady. She had fallen for the line. My own mother, she goes, Maz, I like this guy because he says what's on his mind. I go, Mom, are you crazy? He's anti-immigrant. If he became president, your relatives couldn't come to visit you. She goes, I don't like them anyway. So the anti-immigration sentiment is going far. Immigrants are against immigrants. But no, really, I think a lot of it is based on fear. And I do my stand-up, and I try with my stand-up to just show a different side of Middle Easterners, of Iranians, of immigrants. I think Fresh Off the Boat is a beautiful thing because it's a TV show. Listen, if Americans aren't gonna travel to these places and see these people, then at least we can bring these people to their living rooms and make them watch us. And realize, like when I did my stand-up, one of the first tours I did, it was called the Axis of Evil Comedy Tour. There was 4 of us. Yeah, the Axis of Evil Comedy Tour, yeah. And there was 4 of us, and we came out on Comedy Central, and it was 4 Middle Eastern Americans doing stand-up. We ended up on Comedy Central. I always say it was the first time we had 4 Middle Easterners on an American show, and we didn't all get killed. So it was progress. But one of the interesting things was the audience was filled with other Middle Easterners, as well as other non-Middle Easterners. But the beauty of it was it showed them laughing. And I ended up going on a conservative website afterwards. I think it was the Sean Hannity's website. Somehow I ended up on a link and ended up there. One guy wrote another guy, said, I never knew these people laughed. And think about it, you never see us laughing in American film or television. Maybe like an evil, like, whoa. So I'm honored that you guys have me on this panel. I'm honored to be here with all these people. And again, immigrants love you. Immigrants love America. We love America. And there's nothing to be afraid of. Let's just hug it out.
So where I thought you were going to say there at the very end is the now iconic line from the now iconic musical Hamilton, which is immigrants, we get the job done. Right? And Roberta, the work that you are doing right now to connect artists and immigrants and people who are not immigrants but are trying to reckon with what it means to be and belong in this country right now, is so inspiring because in this case, it is artists who are getting the job done, right? Artists who are forcing the question about not only the stories we tell, but what are the assumptions that we have baked in about each other. You know, it wouldn't come out until Maz responds to what's on the website there. It wouldn't come out in normal conversation that, yeah, I don't think Middle Eastern people laugh. Right? That just wouldn't kind of emerge in the first layer of conversation. But there are ways in which art or comedy or other forms of just nonlinear ways of unpacking the world take us there. So why don't you tell us about the work that you all have been doing and what you've been learning?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a theater director, and I've been a working artist since 1979, which, like most working artists in America, means I've had some day jobs. And one of my most, killing, whatever, hard day jobs I had, but also fulfilling, was I worked between 2002 and 2015 heading the arts program for the Ford Foundation for the United States. And actually, I coordinated with the Middle East and Mexico in my last several years there. And really what I saw was, Ford is very much concerned with the issue of inequality. And we were just talking, Jose and I, right before this, that of all arts funding in the United States, the majority of it goes to organizations with budgets over $5 million, which are only 2% of all arts organizations. And arts organizations that have a specific mandate to work with communities of color and disadvantaged economically communities are only getting 10% of the funding. So right away you see this inequity, right? And at the same time, our country's really changing. And so I started this project, Arts in a Changing America, at the California Institute of the Arts, because we're in a moment of profound demographic change. We will never be the same country we were, that Trump and people say, let's take back our country. They really mean that, and we're in a moment where we need to learn. We really actually don't know who we are as a country and where we're going. So right before this, I was in Minneapolis, where we did a learning exchange with artists on the ground to really look at what is going on. And we were doing workshops led by immigrant artists, led by First Nations artists, led by artists who are deeply engaged in community practice. One of them is a photographer named Wing Huey, who did a photo workshop where we looked at how others see us, how we see the other, and how we would like to be seen. So I actually just wanted to share a photograph with you. Oops, not that. Sorry, somebody put that other photograph up already. There you go. So you should take a look at this, Jose, because this is a picture. I was born in territorial Hawaii before statehood. And this is a picture where if I asked you who is the native and who is the newcomer, I think we'd probably all agree who is who, until I tell you that this is actually a photograph in Colorado. Colorado is where my little migrant feet first hit the ground on the continental United States. And I actually love this photo because I think it's also a metaphor for the changing of America. My new friend looks quite unsure of where we're going. She looks a little destabilized. But I'm actually pointing forward. I'm pointing at, I think, a future, right? And we all have heard about that future, that by the year 2042, people of color in aggregate will eclipse the historic Caucasian population. And that change is really rolling up from the next generation. The majority of babies now born are minorities. That's an oxymoron, by the way.
Yep.
And, you know, Maria de Leon of the National Association of Latino Arts and Culture talks about how every 40 seconds a young Latino or Latina turns 18, which has tremendous voting implications. And this flip has already happened in most major metropolitan areas and entire states, right? So I want to share another photo. This is a photograph of one of my uncles and my paternal grandfather. And just like you were saying about immigrants love America, my grandfather came to America in the 1920s as a young man because he was a Christian, and he had been converted to Christianity, and the missionaries had told him about this wonderful country where he aspired to have religious freedom. And I love this line that Jose has, which is, "We are here because you were there," right? And he came here, and he changed his name to George, after George Washington. He had 10 children with my grandmother. He gave them all completely unpronounceable American names. I mean, try saying Roberta if you speak Japanese. And he encountered an America that actually prevented him from buying a house, where he could not own land or buy a house, where it was illegal to intermarry with Caucasians, where he was ineligible to become a citizen, and where he could not vote to change any of those laws. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. A couple days later, the FBI knocked on his door. They took my grandfather for questioning downtown, and my family did not see him again for years. He was effectively disappeared. The majority of my family was sent to internment camps around the country, but most of them actually were interned here in Colorado, in Granada. We call it the Amache camp. My grandfather was, instead of being in Department of Interior camps, was sent to Department of Justice camps. So, you know, like Guantanamo is a Department of Justice camp. So he was moved secretly between Bismarck, North Dakota, Missoula, Montana, Lordsburg, New Mexico, Crystal City, Texas. He really loved America and always wanted to see it, but I don't think quite that way. During that period of time, 3 of my uncles enlisted, volunteered for the US Army out of camp, and they served in segregated units. With my grandfather's blessing. My grandfather was released 1 year after V-Day, 1 year after the official end of the war. He was an artist, and when the FBI seized him, they seized his journals, his sketchbooks, all those wonderful things that got put into boxes called evidence. No charges or trial were ever brought. It is said that he is one of, or possibly the longest held internee of World War II. Why do I raise this personal story? I tell you this story because we're living in a time of demographic hysteria, of new nativism, of xenophobia, where people are being racially profiled, where people are under threat because of their racial and cultural identity. And I also tell you this story because I think it's important for us, in order to look forward, right? We have to look at history. We have to look at the fact that this is not a moment where we're just changing because of some fluke or we're all having many more babies. You know, this is a moment that's changing because the United States was constructed as a white country by law, through slavery, through the disenfranchisement of people, through broken treaties, now with the incredible incarceration, laws and criminalization, right, of Black and brown communities, et cetera. So I think that what we're looking at is this swell of who we're becoming is in large part due to the legislation of the civil rights era, and particularly in terms of immigration, the 1965 Naturalization and Immigration Act, which all are contributing to us, I think, truly becoming a possibility of a pluralistic democratic country.
Thank you, Roberta. this, the lag effect, the generational lag effect between things that are happening and the ways that we see and feel them in the country. You think about the wave of post-1965 immigration to the United States, which has been so heavily Hispanic and Asian. And yet still our mass popular culture only in fragments reflects that vast now 40-year wave, right? And one of the great fragments of that actually, and one of the promising signs that we're about to catch up, has been this show Fresh Off the Boat. And if you haven't seen Fresh Off the Boat, it is this twisted, irreverent, I think, take on the kind of classic American family sitcom. And it's twisted not only because the characters don't look like the Leave It to Beaver family, it's twisted more actually in the subtlety of the humor and the subtlety of the ways in which little seeds of knowing in America that is not about whiteness get planted throughout. And it's a really powerful show. And Melvin, your experience in bringing this show to life, which was itself just full of drama and a lot of creative tension, has now shifted the culture. It's become a landmark, and a younger generation of people, not just Asian Americans, watch this show, but people in general watch this show and see the new America that Roberta is describing. So tell us, I don't know if you want to tell us about the show, or if you wanted to show some clips.
Can I first say, it's awesome what you've done. Like, you're so courageous. Like,
Oh.
I recently found out that my family were paper sons, and there was a whole thing where they were undocumented for many generations before. Like, it dates back to the railroad and the gold rush. And my father passed away, and I found all the paperwork when I looked through his stuff. And oddly, my fake last name would have been Liu. So we could have been fake cousins.
It's I always do say you're my brother from another mother.
There you go.
So
Your brother from some snakehead who came to southern China. But yeah, so I just think it's so cool and awesome that you did it. Yeah, sorry, about the show. Fresh Off the Boat. Yes, as Eric says, I produce movies and TV shows. One of them is Fresh Off the Boat, which makes it a shoe-in for this panel. Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, when we started doing this, I never thought of it as any sort of cultural phenomenon or any historic first. I get paid by 20th Century Fox to make television shows, and I do a lot of them. And it was one of those years where they said, they called me up and we had sold and we had done our thing to fulfill our deal, and they said, is there anything else you want to do? And I said, for free on top of it? They said, yeah. So I thought long and hard about it, and it was just something that, I didn't even have a plan for it, really. I said, if you're willing to do anything, I would love to do a show about a Chinese American character, not even a family show. I was trying to figure out a way to put a Chinese American character on TV. And I thought about many different ideas, whether it's like a white guy marrying an Asian woman or Asian guy marrying a white, like some sort of thing. And one day it occurred to me that I grew up watching shows like Family Ties and Growing Pains, and I would literally rush home, finish homework really quickly, and watch all of it on KTLA 5. And I thought, that's the way in. That's the thing. This is, I'm American, and this is a portrait of an American family. And I remember sort of gearing up to pitch it with a lot of just sort of hesitation on what it was. And I even, I had a friend send me a Nielsen report on the Asian American market at the time. And I was prepared to argue it with numbers and the population's growing and this and that, and I was ready. And I walked in there and I gave them the idea, and they said, yeah, let's do it. Didn't have to do anything. And I figured, for them it was sort of low risk, we're just gonna try it, and something happened, awesome. And it did. And growing up sort of first generation American here, my mother always wanted me to be a doctor. I am very far from being a doctor and spent much of my young adulthood being a disappointment. And it wasn't until the show where I think she really understands what I do. And it wasn't until the moment it actually appeared in the Chinese newspaper where she was like, oh, I get it now. So I compiled sort of a clip package here of all the moments that make Lucille Mar proud. And just to give you a taste of the show.
Let's see if we got our AV working.
I have to be the boss of some costume show. Oh, yay! We need Editor in the play.
Why? You're not going to become actors. You think they're going to put two Chinese boys on TV?
Can I get this?
How much? Too much.
No, man, what you doing?
Get used to it. You're the one at the bottom now.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, you are. It's my turn, Chink.
We need a look that instantly says, success.
The address is 44 West 44th Street.
Oh, hell no!
What's wrong?
Well, in the Chinese culture, the number 4 is bad luck. On account it's pronounced "si," which sounds like the Chinese word for death. "Si."
从我嫁给 Louis 以后，你让我觉得我永远不够好。
我不是说你不够好，那你就是你认为自己是千金小姐。
千金小姐会买衣服给你，为你给你一个地方住吗？
那是你应该做的事啊。
那是我应该做的。Honey, where does your mother live? El Paso?
不要跟白人比，他们是最残忍的。
We don't get opportunities to be on TV. That's why when we do, we need to present our best face. You know what it reminded me of?
Don't say it.
Long duck, dog.
You should yell, automobile!
Thomas, you missed your opportunity, man. You should have yelled, oh, sexy girlfriend!
The Chinese guy in that movie became what everybody thought all Chinese people were. He made people think that was okay. That's why when we get opportunities like this, it matters.
It tells us what job is a good fit for our personality.
Surgeon General, very good, Evan.
Dang, fool. Even by Chinese standards, you're a nerd.
So the Chinese word for fish is a homonym for the word surplus.
And why lions?
They're used to summon wealth and good fortune.
I thought red was for wealth and good fortune.
We like wealth and good fortune.
It's the Asian Super Bowl. Michael Chang is in the Australian Open. We are witnessing history. You boys are so lucky to have an Asian pro athlete to look up to. It's way more than what I have.
Why do you never call on me?
I can't pronounce your name.
You can learn how to pronounce it.
Are you really gonna have this conversation with everyone you meet?
I'm Chu Taisha. Chu Saita. Chu.
What does it mean?
Colorful sunset glow.
Maybe we can call you Glow, which everyone can pronounce.
Try not to be too judgmental about Eddie's girlfriend. I know you wanted to date a Chinese girl, but this is Florida. His options are limited.
Oh, hi. You didn't tell me your girlfriend was Chinese. Oh. I almost lost my balance from joy. Give me the bill.
No, I got it.
No.
我终于存到钱了，可以带你们去美国了。可是你们之间只有一个能去，他应该去。哦，他应该去。No.
Okay, yes, I'll go.
什么？
In the middle of a Chinese polite fight? Said no Asians on TV, huh?
It's the most therapeutic project I've ever been involved with. I don't have to go to the shrink anymore.
Well, one of the things that's great about Fresh Off the Boat is the insertion of, I mean, I don't know how many non-Chinese or non-Asian Americans would immediately know what a Chinese polite fight is. But I think almost every culture has some rough equivalent of making a great show of being the one to pay the bill or being the one to take the responsibility and having a big fight over that. And I think the beauty of this show is actually the same beauty of this panel here, which is that you get to the universal through the particular. Right? If we just had a conversation here about, let's talk about migration, let's talk about borders, let's talk about race, let's talk about religious misunderstanding, that would have been, okay, kind of interesting. But it was the vivid particulars of each of the people on this panel that made these things pop, right? And there are a couple themes that came out just as the 5 of you were presenting that I want to call out, actually, and just throw it open for a more fluid conversation here. And the most basic one, which Jose touched on a little bit, and Roberta as well, is simply this: whiteness. What is whiteness, right? And I think there's a great, one of the great challenges / opportunities of our time is to, in ways that are sometimes political and linear and legal, and sometimes cultural and kind of intangible, is to de-link Americanness and whiteness. Right? And so I just wanted to kind of hear some more thoughts from all of you about the meaning of whiteness and how it's played out in the work that you're doing, and how you're trying to help this country navigate this transition that Roberta is describing to majority people of color.
I just wanted to provide a couple more statistics. I think it's going to tie some more together here. Yeah. So in our country, in the past 50 years, 55% of the total population growth came from mostly Latinos and immigrants, Latinos and Asians. In the next 50 years, 88% of our total population growth is gonna come from mostly Latinos and Asians. So Latinos are now the largest minority group. Although I live in Los Angeles, 72% of all women in LA are women of color. 72%, where Hollywood lives, right? 48% of all women in LA are Mexican, 48%. But doesn't that question the whole idea of who's the minority, who's the majority, and what the mainstream really even is? And I think this is why the fact that we are looking at this dramatic, unprecedented demographic earthquake that we're seeing in a country that hasn't really fully grappled with the Black experience, right? In a country that never really talks about the Native American experience. That's why I think we are where we are. And I have to say, by the way, as somebody who travels a lot, as Eric knows, I lived in Tuscaloosa, Alabama for a month and a half. And that's when I knew that I was like, oh man, we're in trouble here. Just because here I am wanting to talk about immigration, but people are actually still stuck with people who are biracial, who are half white and half Black, and whether or not that makes them Black. Stuff like that, right? But for me, art, and what I mean art, I mean storytelling, it is, to me, the only real mirror to life. It's not politics, it's not policy, it's art. And unfortunately, from a funding perspective, as Roberta says, we are it's kind of an emergency, because we are not fully telling these stories, which means that white people are not benefiting from hearing these stories. I actually think one of the things that white Americans will benefit from, and what we're going through, is the fact that you're no longer the mainstream. So we're gonna take that burden out of you, right? You're not just the default. The world doesn't revolve around white people. It revolves around all of us. But that's a hard thing to talk about.
Well, that's a hard thing to talk about in where people have a zero-sum mindset.
Yes.
That is a very difficult thing to talk about, because one group's gain is another group's loss. But what you're hinting at here is the possibility of a positive sum story. That this is not just a set of trends that white Americans have to get used to. This is a set of trends that will liberate white Americans as much as it will liberate non-white Americans.
And by the way, let's also not stereotype all white people, because having spent Arkansas, Alabama, Mississippi, Wisconsin, many white people feel what do you mean white privilege? You guys are the ones that took it from us. We're the ones who are poor. So how do we promote empathy, even among working class, lower middle class white people in this country? That's why, for me, for example, getting on Fox News and conservative media is so important.
Yeah, Maz,
one thing I was going to say is we're actually, having traveled around the world, we are a lot more evolved than a lot of other countries are not a melting pot. We are a melting pot, so we're dealing with it. There's growing pains, but like you're saying, there's the population is changing, but we have to deal with it. You go to some other countries, and there's not this much diversity, and the minority, there's such blatant racism against some of the working class in some of these countries. Against some of the Arab countries I've been to, they have South Asian workers they you know, not they, but there's a lot of disrespect for those people. So I think we've evolved. I think we're a lot further ahead than a lot of other countries, but there's going to be growing pains. And more importantly, again, going back to it, I think that we have nothing to fear. I think that really together, that's the beauty. One of the beauties of walking in the streets of New York City is you just look around and you're like, oh, there's a Puerto Rican, there's a Jamaican dude, there's a Arab dude, there's, you know, it's diverse. I love that feeling. So I think we're in a good place too.
Yeah, I would comment on that, you know, as much as like when my children were growing up and we did see the world, you really don't have to go outside of our borders to see the world. Do you know what I mean? Like, again, I just came from Minneapolis. When I went to Minneapolis 20 years ago, there was no racial diversity to the point where I was in the airport and I kind of had this weird feeling. And I realized, oh my God, it's not that it's just white, it's blonde. Like everyone was blonde, right?
It's fun.
And I was like kind of reeling. And you know, you go to the same Minneapolis today, which is actually demographically in 1974 of America, but that doesn't tell the whole story because from what it was, it has changed so much. And it is really, really one of the most diverse and growing more diversity. So that, you know, go into our own world, be part of our own world, because the fact is that America is rapidly resegregating. And, you know, you can see it, for example, San Francisco, which is where we just did our big remap event. By the way, our next one is October 6th and 7th in Detroit. And you're certainly all welcome to come or be part of that live stream. But when we're in San Francisco is rapidly becoming resegregated and one of the most white cities in America based on economic inequality. And, you know, you can see that with school systems. You can see that, again, we talked about the criminal justice system. And that's something that we have to really think about. As whites become part of many rivers, not just the mainstream, how do we actually share power? How do we actually create the kind of tables, the kind of organizations, the kind of structures where we can all be part of that kind of decision-making and sharing of where we're going?
This pivot to the sharing of power is at the very heart of what we all face basically the rest of our lives, right? How does this country learn and maybe thereby teach the rest of the world how to share power in this way that, you know, this opportunity to be planet Earth's first mass multicultural democratic republic, right? There have been countries that have hit 2 or 3 of those marks before, but mass multicultural democratic republic is something that hasn't been done, and it's an open question still whether it can be done, whether there can be the sharing of power in this way. But there's a phrase that Roberta used that, Lina, I want to come back to you with, which was, you said, our worlds, in our worlds. And Lina and I were talking before the panel started, and just, you were describing, I mean, not only the distinction that needs to be called out here between immigrants and refugees, and the immigrant experience and the refugee experience, but also just how it's not even as easy as putting people in one of those 2 boxes or another. Within your own family, those identities and those labels or those self-conceptions have been kind of fluid in different circumstances. Say some more about that notion of in our worlds and what that's meant for you all.
I mean, so from my own personal experience, I'm not an immigrant, I'm a daughter of immigrants, and I moved between the 2 worlds. And I've experienced, you know, my father also wanted me to be a doctor. He probably still does, and everybody in my family. But that whole growing up in that immigrant household, then going back to Syria and coming back to the United States and always renegotiating who I was and how to make it, I was given that kind of drive to succeed and that drive to become whatever I wanted to become. And in my work with refugee kids and refugees in general, you can see that it's the opposite. That choice of an immigrant choosing to leave their country for whatever reason and going to another country because they want to become the best version of themselves and give opportunity to their families, that gives you a lot of strength. Whereas the refugee is the same people, but not having that choice to leave, having to be forced to leave, it gives you a victim mentality. And it really is a mindset, especially with children. I've seen it in kids who have that innate, entrepreneurial drive. And if you can instill that more or nurture it, then they will. What we want to tell kids, Syrian refugee kids, is that you can still become whoever you want to be, and you don't have to let being a refugee define you. And I think that there's something there in trying to make that switch in the mindset of refugees. It has a lot to do with the way that we provide aid to refugees. For instance, in the United States, we have very few of them, of Syrian refugees. We only have around 2,800 out of 5 million Syrian refugees. That's a whole other discussion. But the refugees that do come here, they get 3 months of assistance and they're left to be on their own. That's also an extreme. There are ways to instill this immigrant mentality within refugees for them to be able to make it. Because, as Eric said, my parents are both doctors, and my mother is a pediatrician. When she came here in the early 70s, they had the immigrant mentality. They wanted to make it, they wanted to make some money fast, be able to pay off their loans, go back to Syria and practice medicine in Syria. And they were extremely successful both here and in Syria. They're American citizens, so when they left Syria in 2012 in their 60s. They're not immigrants, they're not refugees, they're Americans, but they came with their 4 suitcases. They, in definition, they were like refugees, and I can see it in my own mother now, not being as happy and not having that kind of mentality of being able to overcome all difficulties. Being a refugee or having that mindset breaks you, and I think we all have to work as a global community to try to embrace refugees and empower them and help them thrive and not just survive, because that's the future. There's 60 million people who are displaced right now globally, and we all have a lot to do to try to help them succeed for all of our sakes.
This notion that Lina is describing, yes. This notion that Lina has described of mindset, immigrant mindset or refugee mindset, is so much, it calls back, again, the exercises you were doing with these refugee children of imagining floor plans, imagination, the capacity for imagination in the first place, and to imagine oneself in what kind of nation, what kind of body, what kind of community, right? And Melvin, I'm curious now, you've had a couple of seasons under your belt of Fresh Off the Boat, just renewed for a 3rd season, and you're going to be taking, as you've gone along, you've continued to take more interesting risks and so forth, but have you done any sort of surveying of audiences to know both Asian and non-Asian, to get a taste of how people's imaginations are changing about what is a family, what is an Asian, what is a way, what is a role model, what is a stereotype?
Well, I think the key to the show is we never set out to make a show for Asian Americans. It's a show for everybody. And we sort of boiled it down to what's the most relatable thing about this family. And it was the immigrant experience. It was sort of feeling like an outsider, a fish out of water, feeling like you don't belong. And when I put it together, Nanachka Khan, who is the showrunner, creator of it, is not Asian American. She's Persian American. And we had many conversations about just like comparing her family and my family and just like the American immigrant experience. And just not feeling like you fit in society perfectly, And that was the jumping off point for all of it. And as we do sort of, the surveys, the networks and the studios love to see who's watching. And we found that behind the Asian American audience, the African American audience is a huge supporter of the show, as well as the Latino American audience. And it's tapped into the thing where I think if you're an immigrant, if your parents are immigrants, if you just know what it feels like to not belong, you connect to the show. And that's the strength of it, and that's the only way to actually do it.
Maz, the fact that the showrunner, the head writer actually of this show is Persian American suggests instead of Axis of Evil show, you can do an axis of, Iranian, Chinese kind of axis of show.
I'm going to run a show.
Yeah, exactly.
Although her last name was Khan, so for a long time everyone thought she was Indian.
Yeah, or Pakistani, right?
Or something like that. And then she's like, nah, surprise, I'm Persian.
There you go. But Maz, what I wanted to, you were saying how if you had grown up in Iran, you wouldn't have been able to be a stand-up comic, not only because of the oppressive nature of the regime, but maybe the oppressive nature of your parents.
Yes.
But the thing that you reminded me of when you said that was there's a wonderful book. It's kind of an academic book, but it's really wonderful, called Life as Politics. And it's about, in a lot of Middle Eastern nations, where you have police states, where you have a regime that forbids any kind of express civic participation or expressing a voice, how there are a million little kind of under the breath, a million little unofficial ways and forms of resistance, basically, right? And one of these sets of forms of resistance have to do with styles of fun, right? And so I remember this long chapter about, in Iran, different styles of fun that are, again, subtle ways of tweaking a system that won't otherwise let you outright have fun, right? And I'm wondering how much just your whole family experience and kind of your sense now, having traveled back and forth, when you go to Arab nations and Middle East nations, and you actually have audiences that are outright laughing and in explicit fun, how do you activate that kind of, in a sense, create permission for people to make that leap from the subtle, sort of unofficial resistance to the, I'm going to laugh out loud, I'm going to laugh in ways that are not approved by...
Well, couple things. First of all, I want to talk about, Lina was saying you were born in America, right? Just real quick thing. It's interesting because going back to the fear of immigrants, when the Orlando shooting happened, I think Trump tweeted something along the lines of like, if my Muslim ban had been in place, this wouldn't have happened. And unwisely, I decided to tweet him back. No, he didn't tweet me, but I decided to tweet. And I said, he was born in America, you idiot. Those are my words. And then someone tweeted me back going, well, if they had banned his parents, then I've heard this argument a lot now. And I go, wait a minute, so how far back are we going with this ban? It's the dumbest thing in the world. And it goes back to what I was saying. Immigrants love this country, but they're playing on the fear, right? And I get sometimes, if I post something that is, pro-Middle Eastern or pro-Muslim, I will get someone tweeting me going like, you should go back to your own country. You think you could do this in your own? And I go, first of all, no, I left that country because we didn't support the regime. That's why we left Iran, because of the revolution. And then the hostage crisis happened, and people were bullying me, thinking that I had something to do with it. And I'm like, no, I'm in Marin trying to play kickball. You know what I'm saying? and it's what you're talking about. When I go to these countries, I appreciate America so much more. I've only been to Iran once in the past. Since I left Iran, I left when I was 6. I went back about 20 years ago, 17, 18 years ago. That's when I started doing stand-up. Ever since then, I've done jokes about the leadership. So I don't want to go back. Because they'd be like, hey, one more show in the prison. So I appreciate America. And whenever people come at me with what you were just saying, with like, you love those places, go back to those places, and I'm like, no, you idiot, I don't love those places. I think the people of those places are good people, but the governments of those places do not allow the freedoms. Matter of fact, when we first started touring with that Axis of Evil tour, we ended up doing the Middle East, and I've gone back now several times to do shows, and the first thing they told us, they would say, look, you can talk about anything you want, but no sex, no religion, no politics. So I was like, hello and good night. So listen, again, we are in a great country, and we have the ability to talk about whatever we want to talk about. We have the ability to be whatever we want to be. And so that's what, and so I'm telling you, immigrants love this country, and I wish the people that hate immigrants would start realizing that we really love this country, we love the opportunities we get, and we get to talk about whatever we want and without being arrested. It's fantastic.
So again, part of where the reason why there continues to be the resistance in the culture, in our politics, in what the tweets you get, isn't necessarily that people, they may or may not believe that immigrants love this country, but what they do believe is that there's a power shift happening, right? And I want to return to this topic of power. And whether it's zero-sum or positive-sum, and how through the work that you're all doing, whether storytelling of different kinds, art of different kinds, creativity certainly in all forms, how do we change our country's notion of how power gets shared, allocated, divided, and exercised in civic and cultural life. Jose?
I wasn't quite going to answer that question. Okay. I was going to go to what you were saying really quickly about this. Yes, I think it is fear. I think a lot of that it is, and this was why I think for me, like really engaging people who, when I show up, I'm like a big question mark. They're just like, who is this person? He's undocumented, he's gay, he majored in Black studies in college, why haven't they deported? You know, all that, right? And then one of the things I really learned is that it's not necessarily because they're fearing me or whatever, but a lot of it has to do with, guess what? People wake up every day thinking about themselves, not about me. And unless I can connect with that struggle, with their struggle, I'm not gonna get anywhere. You know, like I think the empathy quotient in general has to be raised. And I think that is what art does. I think that's what the best kind of art can do. And I have to say, by the way, I'm still stuck with what you said like 30 more minutes ago now when you said that Syrian refugee didn't exist 5 years ago. 65 million refugees around the world, 270 million migrants around the world. So 270 million migrants, 65 million refugees. So that's a lot of people. I'm not good at math. 350 something? Okay, so they're moving around, push, pull, voluntary, not voluntary, right? And this is where we need to connect the dots between what happened in the UK and what's happening here. Why are people moving? It's not because we want to be called a bunch of illegals and criminals, right? We have to ask you, why did you move, right? And I think the root causes of migration is one of the defining issues of the 21st century. And I'm not quite sure our politics and our policymakers have the language to talk about it. And the art, to me, is the one that creates that space, that language. And we need more of it. When I got arrested, Eric said this, I got arrested 2 summers ago. I was supposed to come here, so I couldn't come. But when I got arrested, it was we're not even talking about the Central American refugee crisis. Right now in America, there are children, Central American young children, who have to represent themselves in front of an immigration judge. There's a 5-year-old kid, I think from Guatemala, who had to talk to a judge in LA to explain why he should stay in the United States of America. No lawyer, right? When I got arrested, you know, because in this country now, the media conflates immigrants and refugees. They couldn't even call these children Central American refugees. They had to call them a bunch of illegal kids, right? And all I could think about when I got arrested, because they put me in the exact same cell as the boys, what, maybe 6-year-old to like 12-year-old boys? The girls were in the other cell. And I'm looking at them and I'm thinking, have we even asked ourselves these questions of what does US foreign policy and US trade agreements have to do with migration pattern? What did we do to Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras? Who gave them the guns? Who did we side with during the civil wars? When Roberta was saying, you know, we are here because you were there, do you know what you've done? And then now what? And to me, this is an urgent question that we are so busy in the politics of it that we haven't really grappled with the core questions that we're dealing with.
And I think very similarly with kind of parallel, you know, whether it's Britain with Brexit or France or other places where they're dealing with their colonial legacy.
Yes.
And, you know, where they were before is who's now part of their population. And it was fine to deal with it from before, where you could go there and benefit from whatever resources were being drawn from the there. But now that there are Black Britons and there are people from, you know, India and the Caribbean, et cetera, that it's very hard for people to deal with this issue of national identity, with birthright, with who is part of our citizenry and who is not.
Well, nobody wants to go look at the history. Like you said, it's unfortunate. That's what upsets me whenever there's some sort of attack. Let's say there's a terrorist attack, and then they quickly turn it on saying, well, look, they're all coming to get us. They hate our freedoms. That's why they're coming. They hate our freedoms. What do you talk? Like, look at the history again. Look at what we've been involved with. And I'm not saying that the actual criminals who conduct the terrorist acts are right, but I'm saying that we got to look and go that, yes, you're right, there's a history of our involvement in some of these countries that leads us to where we are. And furthermore, again, you cannot say that criminals that do an act, like when Trump said that Mexicans are all drug dealers and rapists. It's like, okay, there's drug dealers and rapists that are Mexicans. There's drug dealers and rapists that are white people. There's people killing us that are Muslim. There's people that are killing us that are Christian. So, but when the Christian guy does it, they don't go, oh, all white people out. You know what I'm saying? So we don't look at the history, and you're right. It's this Twitter instant culture, and then you get these slogans on the news. They did it because they hate our freedoms. One of the most recent things that I thought was kind of ironic to me as a Middle Eastern American, when the whole the sit-in for the gun thing in Congress just happened, they had a Republican congressman interviewing on CNN, and he said, well, what's it called? No fly, no buy. He said, well, no fly, no buy. The problem is, what if you accidentally end up on the no-fly list? And then it's going to be hard to get off. I was like, it's interesting how concerned Republican congressmen become about the no-fly list when it has to do with gun ownership. But when a bunch of brown people were like, yo, my name's Ahmed and I'm on the fly list for no reason, they were like, whatever, you're on your own. You know what I'm saying?
So what you're describing,
there's
Lina?
one thing about also the injection of creativity and innovation and imagination, not only in the arts, but into our politics itself. For instance, just the whole immigration process, which what you're talking about now, and the injustices. I mean, there are ways for us to deal with refugees and immigrants. It's unacceptable in the year 2016 that people are still drowning in the Mediterranean, paying thousands of dollars to smugglers because they need to prove their worth by actually standing on European land because they don't have the right passport. Yeah. We can process refugees in different ways. We have all of these startup culture, the entrepreneurship, all of the innovations that people are creating, apps for everything. There's a way for large agencies to be processing refugees in their host countries, not by letting them fund a multi-billion-dollar smuggling routes. The same thing that goes for the United States, where they have to wait for 24 months to be registered. Yep. And it's unacceptable for us to be living this way. And all of these tragedies, from the boys in the prison cell to the people drowning, it's on all of us.
I'm going to pause here, and actually we're a little short on time for questions, but I want to invite anybody who has either a question or something you'd like to throw in the mix, just actually a series of you to throw some questions in, and then we can kind of, in closing, respond to those. Yes, sir. And hold on for the microphone that's coming to you.
Hi. First of all, everybody was great, and I can't wait to see Fresh Off the Boat. So, Jose, you talk about helping illegals come out. What about the rule of law? Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody is here in America because of our rule of law. Yeah. I mean, that allows you the creativity to do all the great things that you're doing.
Okay, let's pause there, and well, hold on. I want to see if there are any other questions that people want to throw in the mix. We've got one hand here. I want to bring in some other folks. Let's pass the mic down over to you.
There was someone over here.
There's someone in the middle here. Who was it? Yeah, you.
Oops.
It's not on.
Turned it off.
Okay. Okay, so for purposes of our the recording, since you weren't amplified there, I'll just repeat the question. Speaking as someone who is white and aware of both this history that people are talking about here, needing to reckon with, and aware of the privileges that come unearned with whiteness in America today, the question is, what can you do? And what do you do with that? And so There was one final question, swing around here, and we've got a mic right behind you, and then we'll...
Thank you very much. I'm Elif Gökçidem. I think that, empathy and compassion arts, as a tool to evoke empathy was a recurring theme. I think empathy is a human problem. It's not just only Americans lack empathy, or Turks lack empathy, or Iranians. I think it's a human problem, and I think we really need to rethink our institutions and have tools and innovative mechanisms and systems for us to be able to unlock our potential, human potential, to have empathy and compassion, not only to another human being, but also to nature, environment, natural resources, everything.
Great.
Thank you. I know you're short on time, so I'll maybe talk later a little bit after.
Well, let me invite our panelists in closing just to say really a word. We've got about 5 minutes left, either in response to, Jose, probably in response to that question. And,
Sir, we can talk too after.
Or just closing thoughts as well here.
So I actually respect the rule of law so much that I publicly outed myself. I didn't need to do that. I could have just self-deported and say, you don't want me, I'll see you later, bye-bye, right? So in some ways, I kind of blew the whistle in what the issue is. Actually, a Republican friend of mine has just said, you should sue the government for taxation without representation. You paid all these taxes, right? So that's one thing. I respect the law, but I don't think in this country, a country that legalized segregation, a country that legalized women not having the right to vote, I don't think we should mistake legality for justice. I think those two things are separate.
Lina, closing thoughts or responses to these prompts?
To the young woman about what you can do. We can't do anything about the past except to continue to talk about it and share stories like Roberta's story, which is really powerful. Like, I didn't know about all of this, so I really am going to take that forward. But there are, wherever you're living, there are refugees, there are refugee resettlement agencies, there are Syrians and non-Syrians who have come to this country. They are completely cut off from any kind of assistance after 3 months. These people don't need funds, but they do need somebody to come talk to them, take them to the DMV, take their kids to school, to help them register in schools, get them through the process of to get them standing on their feet. And these people are all across the country, and this is a way to help now and they're really looking to connect with people who are outside their own cultures so that they can build their own futures.
Thank you, Lina. That's Maz?
I'll do two quick things. First of all, the thing with the legality, I also think that there's an issue with a lot of people are leaving really bad situations. I've heard a lot of programs about kids that are being followed, that are being pursued by gangs, and their parents are shipping them off to come here, and they enter illegally. It's unfortunate, but that's just how the process begins. And then from there, hopefully, we can help legalize them. About how you can, look, you're right, you're not responsible for it. And the same thing goes on my end. Whenever a terrorist attack happens, I'm not responsible for it. When a hostage thing happens, I didn't do it. I have nothing to do with it. So when people go on in the media and they start ranting and raving about getting rid of all of us, I go, yo, I had nothing to do with this. And they're not looking at that. So just the way you feel, I feel the same way. But I'll tell you what you can do is a very simple thing is you can start to maybe go to a Persian restaurant and have some Persian food and get to know the guys who own the place. Or just make friends from these different backgrounds. Because the fact is, a lot of the people who hate the other don't know anyone from the other. And it's like, go have a burrito at like a real burrito place, not Taco Bell, and hang out and get to know these people, or just open your eyes and you realize so quickly that we all just want to live our lives, provide for our families, and maybe go to Disneyland.
Thanks, Maz. Roberta.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I would just go back to we don't know everything. And, for me just now in Minneapolis, I actually sought out Dakota people because I wanted to know who was here before Minneapolis was here. And it became a really incredible learning journey for me. I've done the same thing in New York, trying to find out who are the first peoples, the Lenape people. I've gone into hip-hop circles. I am not a hip-hop anything. I think sometimes as artists, we always are the people who we make ourselves uncomfortable so that then some incredible discovery and joy or some higher thing can happen, right? And so I think at this moment, we do have to make ourselves uncomfortable, because if we make ourselves uncomfortable, that's when the kind of deepest love can happen, the most truest friendships can happen. I think there's an incredible amount of generosity and expertise and brilliance in this room. There are many, many organizations where you all live that are doing incredible work, and finding out about them, and I don't know, you know, supporting them, being in their audience, being a board member, connecting in real ways. I would just encourage. And then I would encourage people to notice anytime you feel like you are participating in segregation, how do we change that? Notice it, because I actually have always noticed when I come into a room, I suddenly, you know, my husband has said that to me going to theater in New York, where, you know, we'll go in and I am in my 60s, but he'll say, gosh, you just brought in the both the diversity, racial diversity, and the youth quotient into this room. That's how old some of these theater audiences are. And so, you know, if we're in something that looks exactly like us all the time, I mean, that's a joy in that for me, but there's also something wrong with that. And how do we break that up and create something different?
Last word, Melvin?
Film and TV is still like the largest mass, you know, medium. And I sort of jump on what you said. And, you know, I'm honored that the show has an audience where, you know, like that gentleman over there who was saying, can't wait to watch Fresh Off the Boat. Like, that is great. You know, I don't know anything about you, but then there's a whole segment of the population that doesn't know this is how a Chinese American family is like. And I think, you know, that speaks volumes, and I feel like the pressure of the show, pressure to just make the show even better. And my hope is it's not the only one, that like it becomes a thing, and more shows, TV becomes more diverse, and film becomes more diverse, and because it just needs to happen, you know. And I think you're seeing it in the last 2 years. You know, TV has become far more diverse. Where when I first started working as an intern in this business, people thought diversity was a negative. Like it would immediately, your show would not work. But now it's working, and it's a positive, and we're learning that lesson.
Well, the way I'd like to just segue off of that in closing here, the thing about this age of television and this age of culture is that we are not just audiences. We are creators, right? And the people who make the shows respond to us and respond to our stories and respond to our voices in new ways. And what Roberta had to say about getting uncomfortable and getting comfortable with being uncomfortable is at the heart of this intersection of art, immigration, citizenship, identity. It is resisting neat categories. It is resisting the kind of self-satisfaction of, oh, I'm okay because I do enough here, or I'm okay because I'm somewhat aware of what's being talked about here. If that's so, great, but now push to the next frontier of discomfort, the next frontier of being a beginner. And our task right now, we are all beginners in making this new country. We're all beginners in trying to reckon simultaneously with a history that we still half deny and a future that's hurtling toward us. And I just want to close by reading something to you. Some of you may recognize this. It's called Section 1 of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution to the United States. And I just invite you to listen to these words in the context of what all the artists and storytellers and creators have said here today. Section 1. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor to deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. We have a real choice coming out of a conversation like this, coming out of a festival like this. Are those just words? Is that just a bunch of stuff that a bunch of people wrote in 1868? Is that just the thing that we will take half seriously but really not live? Or are we going to unpack every phrase there and ask ourselves, what does the rule of law mean? when someone who doesn't have the documents, like Jose, lives like a bigger citizen than most people in this country who do have the documents? What is the rule of law when we talk about the lack of equal protection for the people not only in our family histories, but alive and young today? What does it mean to claim the jurisdiction of the United States? Every one of us is charged with this opportunity, and whether you are in politics, in business, in neighborhood life, or in the arts, it's our opportunity and our responsibility to make this new story. Please join me in thanking our panel in this conversation.